For more than 5 decades, Ozzy Osbourne ruled the world of rock with a voice that could shake arenas and a presence that defied logic, time, and even his own mortality. Fans called him the Prince of Darkness, a title that always felt more like prophecy than nickname, because Ozzy lived on the edge of oblivion for most of his life. The drugs, the accidents, the chaos, the near-death experiences, somehow, he always came back. Always. Until the final days when even Ozzy's legendary resilience could no longer save him. In his last months, those closest to him watched a slow and heartbreaking transformation. The man who once screamed into sold-out stadiums now struggled to whisper his own name. The artist who electrified millions was suddenly captive inside a failing body that could no longer keep up with his unbreakable spirit. And the world that adored him had no idea what he was truly going through. Rumors swirled. Secrets tightened. And behind closed doors, a devastating truth unfolded, one that the Osbourne family desperately tried to protect from the public eye. Now, for the first time, this documentary uncovers the emotional, painful, and shocking final chapter of a legend's life. From hidden medical crises to heartbreaking confessions, from family turmoil to the haunting final message he left behind, this is the story of Ozzy Osbourne's tragic final days, and the truth behind the moment the music finally stopped. For years, the world believed that Ozzy Osbourne was invincible. Headlines announcing new injuries, new surgeries, new diagnoses, all seemed to bounce off him like he was made of iron. Fans joked that Ozzy would outlive everyone. But those closest to him could see the truth long before the rest of the world caught on. His body was breaking down, piece by piece, and no amount of sheer willpower could patch it back together. It started quietly, long before his final decline. A stumble here. A slurred word there. A moment of confusion during rehearsals that passed so quickly even he brushed it off. At first, the family dismissed it as exhaustion. After all, Ozzy had been touring for nearly his entire life. A man who had set stages on fire, sometimes literally, was surely entitled to a little fatigue. But the problems didn't fade. They grew, multiplied, and soon became impossible to ignore. Doctors were cautious but honest. Decades of physical punishment, combined with the trauma of his 2003 ATV accident and the onset of Parkinson's-like symptoms, had created a storm inside his body. Every nerve misfired. Every movement hurt. And though Ozzy tried to hide it, his once legendary voice, raw, powerful, unmistakable, began to falter. Notes that used to soar now cracked like thin ice. Phrases he once belted out effortlessly came only after long pauses, slow breaths, and quiet frustration. Sharon Osbourne watched this with a terrifying mixture of love and helplessness. She had saved him from himself more times than she could count, but this was different. This wasn't addiction. This wasn't recklessness. This was nature itself finally calling its debt due. Even then, Ozzy refused to quit. He agreed to surgery after surgery, recovery after recovery. Plates, screws, therapies, injections, modern medicine tried to hold together a man who had spent a lifetime tearing himself apart. Some procedures worked for a time. Others left him weaker. But each one chipped away at the illusion of immortality he had unknowingly cultivated. And then came the moment the family couldn't forget. During what was meant to be a simple conversation about an upcoming project, Ozzy froze. His eyes drifted, unfocused, as though he had slipped behind a curtain no one else could see. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, trembling, and unfamiliar. "I don't think I can do this anymore," he whispered. For a man who had walked through fire, who had survived overdoses, crashes, collapses, and chaos, that one sentence carried more weight than any injury ever had. Sharon tried to reassure him, insisting it was just a bad day. But Ozzy shook his head. "It's getting worse," he said. "I can feel it." From that moment on, the decline wasn't just physical, it was emotional. The Prince of Darkness, the wild-haired, wild-hearted icon who defied every rule of life and death, began confronting his own fragility. And as the truth settled in, the world around him seemed to shrink. Rooms felt quieter. Days felt shorter. The laughter that once echoed through the Osbourne household now carried a tremor of fear. The slow fall had begun, and there was no turning back. As Ozzy's condition worsened, the Osbourne household shifted into a new kind of rhythm, one built around silence, caution, and unspoken fear. Friends who used to drop by unannounced were now quietly turned away. Invitations to public events were declined with carefully crafted statements about rest, recovery, or scheduling conflicts. But behind those polished explanations lived a reality far more fragile than anyone outside the family could imagine. Ozzy's days became a series of battles. Some mornings, he'd wake with a burst of defiance, insisting he was strong enough to walk the garden, play with the dogs, or sit in his studio surrounded by instruments that once defined him. Other mornings, he couldn't make it out of bed. His muscles trembled. His joints locked. His thoughts scattered like shattered glass. Sharon and the children learned to read the signs, the subtle clues that told them whether today would be a good day, or one of the bad ones. Kelly Osbourne, who had always shared a uniquely emotional bond with her father, began spending more time at the house. She brought laughter, memories, old stories of tour chaos and childhood mischief. Anything to lift the heaviness in the air. But even she noticed the shift. Ozzy wasn't just tired, he was retreating. One afternoon, she found him sitting alone in his studio, staring at a wall of gold records. His expression was unreadable, his hands trembling slightly on the arms of his chair. "Dad?" she asked softly. Ozzy didn't turn at first. When he finally did, his eyes filled with something she had never seen in him, fear. "They're taking it away from me," he said. "Who?" "My mind, my body, everything I've ever been." Kelly sat beside him, squeezing his hand. She wanted to reassure him, to tell him he was still Ozzy, still the legend millions adored. But she could feel the truth in his voice. He wasn't just losing strength, he was losing himself. That realization ignited panic within the family. They began pushing for more specialists, more tests, more treatments. Some doctors offered hope, others gave warnings too grim to repeat. Every appointment came with a new layer of tension, a new piece of information the family had to digest quietly while still presenting strength to the public. But the greatest secret they kept wasn't medical, it was emotional. Ozzy began withdrawing from those he loved most. It wasn't intentional, it was protective. He didn't want them to see how much pain he was in, how much effort it took to walk across a room, how deeply he feared the future he had once mocked as impossible. Sharon noticed him slipping away long before anyone else did. Late at night, when the house was silent, she would check on him. Sometimes she found him awake, sitting in the dark, staring into nothing. Other times he was writing, scribbling words in notebooks, crossing out sentences, rewriting them again. He rarely let anyone see what he wrote. But Sharon understood. He was preparing. Not for death, necessarily, but for the moment he could no longer speak for himself. Meanwhile, rumors outside the home began swirling. News outlets speculated about his health. Fans posted worried messages. Some asked if he was dying. Others accused the family of hiding something. The pressure grew, but the truth remained locked behind closed doors. Ozzy's decline wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. And the man who had once commanded the world's attention was drifting into shadows that only his family could see. The secrets were piling up. And soon, they would become too heavy to hide. For weeks, the Osbourne home lived in a fragile balance, one part hope, one part denial, and one part quiet dread. But all of that collapsed on a single morning that the family would later describe as the moment the world tilted. It began like any other day, Sharon reading emails at the kitchen table, the dogs barking at nothing in particular, the soft hum of life trying to feel normal. But normal was about to disappear. Ozzy hadn't come downstairs yet, which wasn't unusual. Some mornings were harder than others. Sharon assumed he was sleeping in, resting after a difficult night. But when an hour passed, then two, something inside her began to twist. She checked the cameras installed upstairs, mostly for safety, not surveillance, and saw that he hadn't moved since dawn. She climbed the stairs quickly, dread creeping up her spine. At their bedroom door, she called his name softly at first, then louder. No response. When she finally pushed the door open, she saw him sitting on the edge of the bed, hunched forward, his hands dangling between his knees like a marionette with cut strings. His breathing was shallow. His eyes were half open, unfocused, as if he were caught between consciousness and something darker. "Ozzy," she whispered. Slowly, painfully, he turned his head. The man sitting before her didn't look like the Prince of Darkness. He didn't look like the wild rocker who'd survived every disaster life had thrown at him. He looked fragile. Small. And terrified. "I can't feel my legs," he said. Those 5 words hit Sharon like a physical blow. Her heart raced as she knelt beside him, trying to steady him, trying not to show panic. When she touched his arm, she realized it wasn't just his legs, his entire body was trembling uncontrollably. Emergency medics were called. Kelly and Jack arrived within minutes, both pale, both terrified but trying to hold themselves together. The house that had once hosted laughter, chaos, and rock and roll madness was suddenly filled with medical equipment, urgent voices, and the suffocating fear that this was the beginning of the end. The doctor's initial observations were concerning, but vague. Neurological episode, they said. Possible spinal progression. Temporary paralysis. Words that sounded more like guesses than answers. Ozzy drifted in and out, sometimes coherent, sometimes confused, sometimes mumbling fragments of lyrics from songs he hadn't performed in years. But the moment that truly broke his family came later that afternoon. While the paramedics adjusted equipment and Sharon answered medical questions, Ozzy reached out blindly, searching the air until Kelly caught his hand. "Don't let me go," he whispered. Kelly nodded, tears running freely. But Ozzy wasn't finished. With a trembling breath, he added, "I think this is it." It didn't matter that doctors insisted the episode might pass. It didn't matter that he'd survived worse, or that hope still flickered in every corner of the room. In that moment, Ozzy felt something deep, instinctive, and far more honest than any medical chart. He wasn't just frightened. He was saying goodbye. The ambulance took him to a private facility under heavy discretion. News vans began circling the neighborhood. Fans online buzzed with speculation. But none of them knew what the Osbourne family felt in that moment, the brutal, paralyzing possibility that the man who had once seemed immortal now stood at the edge of a cliff no one could pull him back from. Everything had changed. And nothing would ever be the same again. After that harrowing day, Ozzy Osbourne retreated further into himself. Even surrounded by the love and vigilance of Sharon, Kelly, and Jack, he began leaving subtle messages, notes, journals, and recordings, addressed not to the world, but to those who mattered most. In them, he reflected on a life lived fully, recklessly, and beautifully, and he confronted the reality he had tried to deny for so long, that every body has limits, even one as extraordinary as his. Sharon discovered the first note tucked into his favorite guitar case. The paper was crumpled, the handwriting shakier than she had ever seen. It read simply, "If I go, don't mourn me. Celebrate me. I did more than I ever thought I could. I loved, I fought, I sang. That's enough." She wept silently, realizing that Ozzy was already preparing for a world without him, a world in which his family would have to survive the loss of a father, a husband, and a legend. Over the following weeks, the family honored these messages. They played his favorite songs in the house, read aloud the lyrics he had written but never performed, and shared memories of his wildest tours, his darkest struggles, and the moments that defined him. Each recollection was bittersweet, a reminder of his brilliance and the fragility that had now taken center stage. The public, of course, remained largely in the dark. Social media buzzed with speculation about cancelled appearances, vague health updates, and whispers of tragedy. But for the Osbournes, this period was private, sacred, and devastating. They knew the man who had conquered arenas, survived chaos, and defied mortality was slowly saying goodbye, not through drama or spectacle, but with quiet dignity, love, and reflection. And then came the moment that would mark his true final act. In a recorded message to his family, Ozzy's voice, once raw and electrifying, was calm and introspective. He thanked them, apologized for the pain he had caused, and encouraged them to continue living boldly. He asked them not to dwell on his struggles, not to fear the shadows, but to remember the music, the laughter, and the endless devotion that had defined him. "I may not be around forever," he said, "but I'm never really gone. I'll always be in the notes, the riffs, the crazy moments we shared. That's eternal." Those who had witnessed the slow unraveling of his health described this final message as both heartbreaking and beautiful, a reminder of the man behind the myth, the human behind the legend. For the Osbournes, it was a chance to say goodbye on their terms, to hold him close while letting go, and to treasure the memories that no illness, no accident, and no passage of time could erase. Ozzy Osbourne's final days, though fictionalized in this account, reflect a universal truth about mortality, fame, and the human spirit. Even the strongest among us are vulnerable. Yet even in vulnerability, there is courage. Even in endings, there is beauty. And in the echoes of his music, his personality, and his love for those closest to him, Ozzy's legend will continue, unbroken, untamed, and unforgettable. The world may never see the intimate, private moments behind the Prince of Darkness's final days, but through this story, we glimpse the heart of a man who lived like no other, loved like no other, and faced the end like the hero of his own life, with honesty, reflection, and an unwavering spirit.